shift of the innovation procedure that historically was mostly captured by the Western world, that is drifting to places where growth is taking place.
Jack Grove, we've seen there are lots of Chinese students in the West. Are there more and more Western students going to China?
Well, there are some going to China. I mean, China is investing a lot of money in their universities, but they really only have a few very good universities. That will change over the next few years because, well, maybe 10 years we'll see a lot more top universities and you'll see lots of good research coming out of them and because they're putting the money in, but they're starting from a very low base, unlike Britain, France and the US, who had universities set up for hundreds of years. China doesn't have that, but they will have many good universities in the future.
And we can now look at those rankings we mentioned at the outset there. And from the 2010 report, we can see the rankings of the best universities, and stacked at the top are US and UK universities. No surprise there. In fact, you've got to scroll down a long way before you find one that's neither American nor British, one from Switzerland, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And 39th position, the École Polytechnique from France. Didier Châtenay, your reaction there?
And it's always this problem of ranking. I mean, what are the criteria? What's the cost of the system? I mean, if you compare the cost of a French student to the cost of a student in Harvard or MIT, and you may understand the ranking. So it's a combination of many factors, and you cannot just take the ranking and say, wow, it's very bad for France. Okay, it's bad, but there are good reasons for this. So
Jack Grove, your thoughts?
Well, lots of French schools are very small universities and they tend not to do as well. The reason, well, France is changing this. They are trying to group together their strongest universities and they will perform a lot better in the future because they will have the scale to take on Harvard, Cambridge and Oxford because the excellence is there. They have some superb teachers and graduates, but the system that France has is not good for the rankings.
Why isn't it good?
Why? Well, you have at some universities you have only a few hundred students, and it's very hard to have top-level research, which is something that is a big part of the rankings if you only have a very small school. When big projects like Paris-Saclay, which is a €4 billion campus in Paris, if that happens, that will be a world-class university. And many of the Sorbonne universities, if they come together and share their strengths, they will also become world-class universities. As it is, they are just too small to compete at the moment.
I want to pick up, though, on one thing. Didier Châtenay, you mentioned its rankings and its subjective, the criteria. But both you and Armand, you've done work as well over in the United States. You've been to American campuses. And we're always hearing word that the French, when they're in science, they all dream of going to America. Is that the case?
First, let me maybe comment on a previous point, because I think my neighbor did the same. I spent some time in American universities. When you're there, even when you're in the top ones, you perceive that there are many labs that are of level comparable to the good ones in France and in Europe. So from that standpoint, it becomes clear that the ranking only transmits some part of the information, not even the level of excellence that you can find in different places. And it's true that administrative structure tend to be smaller in France.
But when you arrived in the US, yes, did you think, wow, this is great, I've arrived in heaven? Or did you think, oh...
When you arrive on an Ivy League school, you say you arrive in a very wealthy place where there's lots of money, allowing selected students to perform very good studies and with good professor. When you do your research, you say, yes, it's comparable to the best labs in France. And so from that standpoint, I mean, there's a dream because of the environment and the amount of money, but nothing so special compared to Good Place in France. And if you compare overall the performance of the education system, that means training not only Ivy League students and overall, then it's much more difficult to, even at an individual level, to have a perception of which system is best.
And when you were in the U.S., what struck you as different when you compared to your French experience in that respect?
I mean, in terms of doing science, not so much. I mean, basically, scientists are all over the planet the same.
They're the same.
I mean, we are excited by new experiments, new ways of thinking, things like that. So basically, there is not much. I mean, from this point of view, it's not really.
All right, so the mystique is not always there. We asked
there are some aspects which are special to the United States. Like there is probably some. It's easier to function. I mean, there is
less bureaucracy.
A little bit less bureaucracy, for instance, which is kind of characteristic, but it's not definite.
We asked on the France 24 debate Facebook page, where would your dream place to go be? We got a lot of responses. Mary from Shirvan in Iran said, I'd like to go to McGill, that's in Montreal. Or she said, as in Canada, or she said the US as well. Now, Sheba Latifa from University Campus Suffolk, not very faithful to her school there. She said she'd like to go to Cambridge. Here's one, Ayanda said he'd like to go to Japan. We'll get to that one in a moment. And Dennis says Germany to study renewable energy. These aspirations, Jack Grove, do they sort of fit a bit what are the general aspirations worldwide?
Well, nowadays, the issue of mobility is so important. You have to have the best people travelling to different universities to work with the best people. In Manchester, we have two Russian scientists who have won the Nobel Prize last year. They're teaching some of the best students in the world, and it's so important that we have open borders, we allow the best students to travel, and we allow people to, fulfill their dream of studying in the best places.
Ludovic Garatini, that's a major point in France because visa requirements are quite stringent. Sub-Saharan Africans, for instance, complain, so do people from North Africa, complain bitterly about how difficult it is for them to go to French universities. Do you have the sense that there could be more people here in Europe that are being left out by because of these visa requirements?
Yeah, of course. I'm just sorry that you're leaving so few times to a researcher to comment on every topic. So we have to say something about the ranking, for instance. Are there like quantitative ranking? Are we focusing on the amount of money? I mean, in Europe, we have, sorry to interrupt because this is a major idea. In Europe, we have already tools that are created and no one are using, like the European Charter and Code for the recruitment of researchers. Where are we having a space to evaluate the institution about that? Which country took the decision to implement the Charter and Code in its own system? First point. So quality is very important there because if you don't do that, you'll have a snapshot that is not reflecting the reality, what we want to achieve in the research system. It means sustainability and attraction of the best mind
and
producing the Nobel Prize we all want.
Let me ask you about your personal experience on that score, because you have studied in France, in Italy, and in Japan.
Yes, I did. So the difference is like my previous colleagues said are enormous, but you can see. Like traveling through the student part and the research part, early stage career, many differences in terms of training. I would say the training is very important, and also the career development. I mean, all the PhD candidates you will ask in France will tell you, and even in different countries in Europe, will tell you, after my PhD, I got these baby blues, and now what? This is a responsibility that should be shared by the university and also the private sector, and I'm very happy to listen to what you said about the opening of all these positions for PhDs. But the training is very important, and see what we can do after. This is lacking, I think, in France and in many European countries, and it's all part of good practices that we can right now share and try to implement everywhere in Europe. Sustainability over the quantity of money you put, which is very important, by the way.
Armand Ajdari, there are three ways to fund research. One is through private companies like yours, one is through a government, and one is through universities. Have we got the mix right in Europe these days?
My impression is that it's difficult to answer globally for Europe because I think the situation is quite contrasted. Beyond what you say, I think it's very important that there are pathways between the different worlds. Some word of some research governmental labs, the universities where education is made, training of people is made, and that's a key point, and industry. And what we need is systems that also allow trajectories to move from one sector to the other, and to have a diversity of people, diversity of career, so that altogether we have a system that is dynamic in feeding both a good education system and a good industry. And as was said earlier, it's clear that in particular for Europe, high-level jobs with intellectual activity research will depend a lot on our ability to train people properly and to channel them in the proper economical channels.
Didier Châtenay, what's your personal experience? If you go, say, to your boss there, you're at the French National Research Foundation, the CNRS. If you go say to your boss, you know, I want a bit of mobility. I want for a year or two to go somewhere else. Is it easy?
It's quite easy. And for scientists,
because France has this reputation of being somewhere that's very rigid, where there's no social mobility whatsoever.
In the CNRS, I mean, you have a good example. Armand has left CNRS to go to Saint-Gobain, and if he had not been happy in Saint-Gobain, he could have come back to the CNRS. CNRS
Really?
gives the ability to his scientists to experience in a company, to experience abroad. When I went to New York, I was part still of the CNRS. So we can move throughout France very easily. If I want to leave one lab to go to another lab, it's quite easy. So mobility perhaps is not at the level we could wish, but there is no problem for people who want to move from sector to sector geographically. So it's not a block system. It's more complex for people in the university, for instance. The problem of mobility for people who are assistant professors or professors is more tricky. But for CNRS scientists, it's...
Jack Grove, are there a lot of places where people would be dreaming about what Didier Châtenay is describing?
Well, I think at his level, I'm sure there is a mobility is quite possible, but I'm really talking about those promising 19-year-old students who perhaps are doing very well in their first degree, maybe want to go to France, maybe want to go to the US to do a postgraduate degree or a PhD. Will they be allowed to go there? That's the big question. We have to be looking to find that 17 or 18-year-old maths genius in China who might be able to transform our understanding of the discipline, and those are the people we have to welcome. It's so important that we open the borders and we allow people, the young people, to have a chance at a very senior level. I don't think it's quite the same issue. I'm talking about the younger people, perhaps in the developing countries, who want an opportunity to show their potential. And it's so important that we let them in and give them a chance to shine.
All right, let them in, make it attractive. And speaking of making it attractive, one final point before we go. Science sometimes, let's face it, carries a reputation of being a little, let's say the word, geeky. Well, not when you listen to the astronauts on that final voyage of the space shuttle back in March.
This has been the space vehicle that's been around, my whole life. I was very, very young when Apollo happened, so I don't remember a lot of that, but that just, seeing STS-1 and what this vehicle can do, and then just the love of flying airplanes kind of led me down this path, and just to now see what we've done with the International Space Station, it's just amazing that we can, when we put our heads together, what we can accomplish.
Armand Ajdari, unfortunately, science is not always as cool as the way it's described by that astronaut. So what can be done to raise its public image?
Well, I think if you look in the last maybe 10 years, there are many shows on TV. There are quite a few endeavors to make science more public and appear as fun, which it is when practiced by many people. So this is a key point, so that children, and as they grow through their education, keep on feeling these challenges and the fun part of it. A point about the geeky aspect of science, I think a challenge for science, when you talk about Nobel Prize, it looks like, oh yes, you single out one person and you say, yes, we need the genius people. What we need is people, a lot of people, having fun in organizations that are efficient at producing knowledge, at producing good education, and at producing good industrial people and economy that's working. And this is a matter of a variety of personalities. Like any big organization, you shouldn't have one profile of a scientist and the scientist behaves like that way. Science as a whole works well if you have different people, people who are connection makers, people who are more original thinkers, and it's really this combination. And it's science is a social word as itself, with diverse tracks, diverse trajectory, and so place for diverse people also. And I think the diversity as well as the fun aspect is important to attract people. Then there are very good careers, and it's essential for the Western world to offer good trajectories and attractive trajectories for these people to develop in academia and in the economic world.
All right, a good recipe there, bringing people in the mix. I want to thank you, Armand Ajdari. I want to thank as well Didier Châtenay, Ludovic Garattini. I want to thank Jack Grove for joining us from London, and thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us, because coming up next, it'll be time for business. That's hosted by Marcus Carlson.